The spring of 1879 brought nothing but sorrow to Martha Galloway, whose tears fell into the rushing waters of the Cimarron River like raindrops in a storm nobody else could see. It had been 3 months since she'd buried her husband beneath the cottonwood tree on their small homestead, and the Colorado Territory seemed emptier than the vast blue sky above her. Martha stared at her reflection in the water, barely recognizing the woman who gazed back. At 25, she had already lived a lifetime. The lines around her eyes weren't there, and she and Thomas had arrived from Missouri 5 years ago, full of dreams and promises. Her once vibrant auburn hair hung loose around her shoulders, catching the last golden rays of the setting sun. The small ranch they had built together sat a quarter-mile back from the river. It wasn't much a modest cabin, a barn with 2 horses, a small herd of cattle, and enough land to sustain them. Thomas had been so proud when they'd finally paid off their debt to the bank last summer. Now it was all hers to manage alone, a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered to the river, her fingers absently twisting the simple gold band on her left hand. Thomas had died suddenly, thrown from his horse while checking fence lines during a thunderstorm. By the time she found him, it was too late. The gurgle of the river was her only answer until a twig snapped behind her. Martha froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She wasn't carrying her rifle, a foolish mistake in these parts. Indians were mostly peaceful now, but rustlers and outlaws still roamed the territory. Before she could move, a deep voice broke the silence. Not anymore. Martha whirled around, nearly losing her footing on the slippery riverbank. A tall figure stepped from the shadow of a juniper tree, his face partially obscured by the wide brim of a dusty Stetson. "Pardon?" she gasped, one hand clutching at her throat, the other reaching for the small knife she kept in her pocket. The stranger stopped a respectful distance away and slowly removed his hat. The fading sunlight revealed a weathered face, perhaps 30 years old, with eyes the color of the river stones, a mix of green and gray. His dark blonde hair was in need of a trim, and several days' worth of stubble covered his strong jaw. "Not anymore," he repeated, his voice softer now. "You don't have to be alone." He cleared his throat, seeming to realize how his words might sound to a woman startled by the river. "Madam, I'm Samuel Easton. I've been hired by your neighbor, Mr. Patterson, to help with his spring roundup. I was right in the boundary line when I saw you sitting here. Thought you might be in trouble." Martha's racing heart began to slow, though she kept her hand on her knife. "Mr. Patterson mentioned he was bringing on extra hands." Her eyes narrowed. "But that doesn't explain why you were watching me from the shadows." Samuel Easton shifted uncomfortably, his hat now held against his chest. "I apologize for startling you. When I recognized you as the widow Galloway, I wasn't sure if I should disturb your private moment." His gaze dropped briefly to the ground. "Mr. Patterson mentioned your situation. I'm sorry for your loss, madam." Martha stood a little straighter, lifting her chin. "Thank you, Mr. Easton. But as you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Just enjoying the evening air." A flicker of something, perhaps skepticism, crossed his face, but he nodded politely. "Of course. Still, it'll be dark soon. Would you allow me to escort you back to your house? These parts can be dangerous after sundown." Martha hesitated. She'd grown used to making the walk alone, but he wasn't wrong. Mountain lions had been spotted near the river recently, and just last month, the Wilsons had lost 3 cattle to rustlers. "I suppose that would be sensible," she conceded, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Though I've made this walk 100 times since." She stopped herself, unwilling to complete the thought. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. He gestured for her to lead the way, falling into step beside her as they followed the worn path back toward her homestead. "How long have you been working cattle, Mr. Easton?" Martha asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence between them. "Most of my life, madam. Started as a boy in Texas, then worked my way north. Been with trail drives, ranch work, even tried my hand at breaking a horses for a spell." He adjusted his gun belt, a well-worn Colt revolver hanging at his side. "But I prefer cattle. They make more sense to me than most people." Despite herself, Martha felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Thomas used to say the same thing. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." They walked in silence for a few moments before Samuel spoke again. "Mr. Patterson speaks highly of you, says you're handling things well, under the circumstances." Martha nearly laughed. "Does he now? Well, Mr. Patterson is being kind. The truth is, I'm barely keeping my head above water." She wasn't sure why she was confiding in this stranger, except that there was something trustworthy in his steady gaze. "The spring calving didn't go as well as we'd hoped. I lost 3 heifers and their calves. And I'm not sure how I'll manage the summer grazing rotation alone," Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Difficult work for one person. Yes, Thomas and I did it together, and even then it was a challenge." She sighed. "I've considered selling, but this land was our dream. I'm not ready to give up on it yet." They crested a small rise, and her cabin came into view, smoke still rising from the chimney where she'd left a fire burning. The sight of it, her home now half empty, caused an ache in her chest. "Well, Mrs. Galloway, perhaps you don't have to make any decisions just yet." Samuel's voice was gentle. "Summer's not here, and solutions have a way of presenting themselves when you least expect them." Martha glanced at him, wondering if he was offering more than just escort service, but his expression remained neutral, respectful. "Perhaps," she agreed cautiously. As they approached her front porch, Samuel stopped at the bottom step while Martha continued up. When she turned to thank him, she found him surveying her property with a critical eye. "Your east fence line is sagging," he observed, "and that barn door needs new hinges before the next storm hits." Martha stiffened. "I'm aware of what needs fixing, Mr. Easton. I simply haven't had time to attend to everything." He met her gaze directly. "I didn't mean to offend, madam. Just making an observation. I have Sundays off from Patterson's place. I could come by and help if you'd allow it." Martha blinked, surprised by the offer. "That's kind of you, but I couldn't accept charity." "Not charity," he corrected. "Just being neighborly. Besides, you could feed me Sunday dinner in exchange. Been eating Patterson's cook's food for 2 weeks now, and I swear the man thinks salt is the only spice God created." A genuine laugh escaped her then, the first in months. It felt foreign, almost painful, like stretching a muscle long unused. Samuel smiled in response, and Martha noticed how it transformed his rugged features, softening them. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you for seeing me home safely, Mr. Easton." He placed his hat back on his head and tipped the brim to her. "My pleasure, Mrs. Galloway. Good evening to you." Martha watched him walk back down the path, his long strides carrying him quickly into the gathering darkness. Only when he disappeared from view did she enter her cabin, feeling oddly unsettled by the encounter. Inside, she lit the oil lamps and stirred the fire, trying to shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. It was only a brief conversation with a passing cowhand, she told herself, nothing more. Yet as she prepared her solitary supper, she found herself wondering if he would really return on Sunday, and more surprisingly, hoping that he would. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with the sky so intensely blue it hurt Martha's eyes to look at it. She had risen before first light, as was her habit, to tend to the morning chores. The cattle needed checking, especially the new calves, and there was always mending, cleaning, and cooking to be done. She had just finished feeding the chickens when she heard the approach of hoofbeats. Shading her eyes against the morning sun, she watched as Samuel Easton rode up on a sturdy buckskin gelding. He wore clean clothes today, a fresh blue shirt under his worn leather vest, and his face was cleanly shaven. "Morning, Mrs. Galloway," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Hope I'm not too early." Martha brushed a strand of hair from her face, suddenly conscious of her work dress and the apron she'd thrown on without thought. "Good morning, Mr. Easton. I wasn't certain you'd come." "Said I would, didn't I?" He led his horse to the water trough, letting the animal drink. "Yeah, brought some tools from Patterson's place. Thought I'd start with that barn door if that suits you." Martha nodded, still somewhat bemused by his presence. "That would be fine. I was just about to start breakfast. Have you eaten?" "Had some hardtack and coffee at dawn, but wouldn't say no to a proper meal." "Very well. I'll call you when it's ready." As she turned toward the house, Samuel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Galloway." She paused, looking back at him. "Thank you for allowing me to help. I know it's not easy to accept assistance, especially from a stranger." The sincerity in his voice touched something in her, and Martha found herself offering him a small smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Easton, and you can call me Martha if you like. Mrs. Galloway makes me feel like my mother-in-law." He grinned, tipping his hat. "Martha it is, and I go by Sam except when I'm in trouble." "I'll remember that," she replied, feeling a curious lightness as she headed back to the cabin. While she prepared a breakfast of biscuits, eggs, and side meat, Martha could hear Sam working in the barn, the rhythmic sound of hammering punctuating the morning bird songs. There was something comforting about having another person on the property again, she realized. The past 3 months of solitude had worn on her more than she cared to admit. When breakfast was ready, she stepped onto the porch and rang the small bell Thomas had hung there years ago. Sam appeared moments later, wiping his hands on a bandana. "Smells like heaven," he said appreciatively as he washed up at the basin she'd set outside the door. Inside, they sat at the small oak table Thomas had crafted during their first winter. Martha found herself studying Sam as he ate with obvious enjoyment. His hands were strong and capable, with calluses that spoke of years of hard work. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness to his movements, a careful precision that suggested he was a man who paid attention to details. "This is fine cooking," he said, buttering another biscuit. "Patterson's cook should take lessons." "It's nothing special," Martha demurred, though she was pleased by the compliment. "Just simple fare." "Sometimes simple is best." Sam took a sip of coffee. "Your husband was a skilled carpenter. Noticed his handiwork all over the property." Martha nodded, a familiar pang of grief washing over her. "Thomas could build anything. Said his father taught him that a man should know how to create something lasting in this world." "Wise words," Sam agreed. "Was he from these parts originally?" "No, we both came from Missouri. Thomas had an uncle who settled out here during the gold rush. When he passed, He left Thomas a bit of money enough for us to buy this land and start our life here." Martha traced the wood grain of the table with her fingertip. "We had such plans." Sam was quiet for a moment. "Plans can change, but that doesn't mean they end." Martha looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "Sometimes it feels that way, though." "I know," he said simply, and something in his tone made Martha wonder what losses he had endured. But before she could ask, Sam was rising from the table, thanking her for the meal and heading back out to continue his work. Throughout the day, Martha found herself watching him as she went about her own chores. Sam moved with confidence and purpose, fixing not only the barn door but also several loose boards on the chicken coop and a section of the corral fence that had been bothering her for weeks. By mid-afternoon, when Martha brought him a cup of water, Sam had removed his shirt in the spring heat, and she couldn't help but notice the lean strength of his shoulders and back, tanned from outdoor work. A jagged scar ran across his left shoulder blade, puckered and white against his skin. "Happened during the war," he said, catching her looking as he turned to take the water. "Shrapnel from a shell at Vicksburg." Martha flushed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "You fought for the Union." Sam nodded, draining the cup. "Enlisted at 17. Spent 3 years seeing things no boy should see." His expression clouded briefly. "But that's long past now." "Thomas was too young for the war," Martha said. "Sometimes I think he felt he missed something important not having served." "He was lucky," Sam replied, his voice flat. "There's nothing glorious about it." Martha nodded, sensing this wasn't a subject he wished to pursue. "I've prepared a stew for supper. It'll be ready soon if you're hungry." Sam's expression brightened. "Sounds perfect. Let me just finish securing this last post." As promised, Martha served a hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread for their evening meal. The conversation flowed more easily than at breakfast, with Sam sharing amusing stories about the characters he'd met during his years working cattle drives, and Martha talking about the challenges and joys of carving out a life in the Colorado Territory. "Do you have family waiting for you somewhere?" Martha asked as they finished the apple pie she'd baked that morning. Sam shook his head. "Lost my parents young. Raised mostly by an aunt who didn't much want the burden. After the war, I just kept moving. Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots." "That sounds lonely," Martha observed. "Can be," he admitted, "but there's a certain freedom in it, too. What about you? Any family back in Missouri?" "A sister in St. Louis. She writes regularly, keeps asking me to come back east." Martha sighed. "She means well, but she doesn't understand that this is my home now, for better or worse." Sam studied her thoughtfully. "It takes courage to stay and fight for what you've built." "Or stubbornness," Martha replied with a rueful smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." As the evening shadows lengthened, Sam helped Martha clear the dishes, then reluctantly announced he should head back to Patterson's ranch before full dark. "I can't thank you enough for all you've done today," Martha said as they stood on the porch. "You've accomplished more in one day than I could have in a month." "Happy to help," Sam replied, settling his hat on his head. "In fact, if you're willing, I'd like to come back next Sunday. Your north fence line needs attention, and I noticed your roof could use some patching before the summer thunderstorms hit." Martha hesitated only briefly. "I'd appreciate that, but you must let me pay you something for your time." Sam shook his head firmly. "Your cooking is payment enough. Best meals I've had in years." Martha started to protest, but the determined look in his eyes told her it would be futile. At least let me send you with some of that pie for later." Sam grinned. "Now that's an offer I won't refuse." As she wrapped a piece of pie in a clean cloth, Martha found herself looking forward to the following Sunday, with an eagerness that both surprised and unsettled her. It had been so long since she'd had something to anticipate. After Sam rode away, the cabin seemed emptier than before, the silence more pronounced. Martha sat in Thomas's chair by the fireplace, a quilt around her shoulders despite the mild evening. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, but deep down she knew. She was beginning to live again, one small step at a time. The following Sunday, Sam arrived just after dawn, this time bringing not only tools but also 2 young saplings apple trees, he explained, that Patterson had ordered but decided not to plant. "Thought they'd do well on the south side of your property," he said. "Give you fruit in a few years." Martha was touched by the gesture, recognizing it for what it was, a statement of faith in her future here. Together they planted the trees, Sam showing her how to protect the tender trunks from rabbits and deer with wire mesh he'd fashioned. This set the pattern for the Sundays that followed. Sam would arrive early, always bringing something useful, seeds for her garden, a new set of horseshoes he'd had the blacksmith make, once even a kitten from a litter born in Patterson's barn to help with the mice in a root cellar. Each week they worked side by side on various projects around the ranch. Sam taught Martha how to mend fences properly, how to predict weather changes by watching the sky, and 100 other practical skills Thomas hadn't had time to share before his death. In return, Martha fed him, listened to his stories, and gradually shared more of her own. By early summer, Martha found herself counting the days between Sam's visits. The rest of the week seemed dull in comparison to the Sundays spent in his company. She started making special preparations, baking his favorite desserts, wearing her prettier work dresses, even pinching color into her cheeks before he arrived. One particular Sunday in June, they were repairing the chicken coop together when Sam suddenly straightened, wincing and pressing a hand to his lower back. "Are you all right?" Martha asked, concerned. "Old injury acting up," he admitted. "Took a fall from a horse a few years back. Sometimes it reminds me I'm not as young as I used to be." Martha frowned. "You should rest. Come inside and sit for a while." Sam started to protest, but another twinge of pain silenced his objection. He followed Martha into the cabin, where she insisted he lie down on the small sofa while she prepared a hot compress. "This should help," she said, carefully placing the warm cloth against his lower back. "My father suffered from back pain. This always seemed to ease it." Sam sighed as the heat penetrated his sore muscles. "Your father taught you well." Martha sat in the chair opposite him, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. This was the first time Sam had been inside her home for any purpose other than meals. "Tell me about your father," Sam said. His eyes closed as he relaxed into the sofa. "What kind of man was he?" Martha smiled at the memory. "A dreamer. Always had some new scheme that was going to make us rich. Never did, of course, but he filled our childhood with adventure. My mother was the practical one, keeping us fed and clothed while father chased his rainbows. Sounds like they balanced each other well." They did. 25 years they were married, and I never heard them say a cruel word to one another. Martha's voice softened. "I always hoped Thomas and I would have that kind of longevity." Sam opened his eyes, his gaze finding hers across the room. "How long were you married?" 5 years. Not nearly long enough." Martha twisted her wedding ring, a habit she'd developed since Thomas's death. We were just getting started, really. I'm sorry, Sam said quietly. It's not fair, losing someone so young. Martha nodded, fighting back the tears that still came too easily. Life rarely is fair, I've found, but we carry on, don't we? We do, Sam agreed. He shifted slightly, adjusting the compress. I was engaged once before the war. Her name was Rebecca. Martha was surprised. Sam had never mentioned any romantic attachments before. What happened? I went off to fight. She promised to wait. A shadow crossed his face. But when I came back, she was married to my cousin. Said she couldn't bear the uncertainty, not knowing if I was dead or alive for months at a time. That must have been painful. At the time it felt like the end of the world, Sam admitted. Now I can see it was for the best. We wanted different things from life. She needed security, stability. I was too restless then, too haunted by what I'd seen in the war. And now, Martha asked softly, are you still restless? Sam looked at her thoughtfully. Less so these days. Maybe I'm finally growing up. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Martha felt a flutter of something in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since the early days with Thomas. It both thrilled and frightened her. Before either could speak again, a sudden crack of thunder broke the silence. Rain began to patter against the windows, quickly becoming a downpour. Looks like I'll be staying a bit longer than planned, Sam observed, sitting up carefully. That is, if you don't mind. I don't mind, Martha replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The storm raged for hours, keeping them confined to the cabin. They passed the time playing cards, talking, and eventually preparing supper together in Martha's small kitchen. There was an ease between them now, a comfortable familiarity born of the Sundays they'd shared. As they ate by lamplight, the rain still drumming on the roof, Martha realized she hadn't thought of Thomas all afternoon. The realization brought a stab of guilt, followed by confusion. Was it wrong to enjoy another man's company so soon? Was 3 months even soon when it came to grief? You've gone quiet, Sam observed, interrupting her thoughts. Penny for them. Martha hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was thinking about Thomas, about how strange it is to be sitting here with someone else feeling comfortable. Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. Guilt is a natural part of moving forward. Doesn't mean you loved him any less. How did you know I was feeling guilty? Recognized the look, he said simply. Seen it in the mirror often enough. Martha studied him curiously. What do you have to feel guilty about? Sam was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. Surviving, mostly. Lost a lot of friends in the war. Then there's the guilt of finding happiness again after Rebecca. Took me years to stop feeling like I was betraying her somehow, even though she'd moved on long before I did. And did you? Move on, I mean. Eventually. Had a few attachments over the years, nothing that lasted. His eyes met hers across the table. But I never stopped believing it was possible to find something real again. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Martha found herself holding her breath, uncertain of what she wanted to happen next. The moment was broken by another crash of thunder, so close it rattled the dishes. Sam glanced toward the window, where rain was now being driven sideways by the wind. I don't think I'll be making it back to Patterson's tonight, he said. This storm isn't letting up. Martha nodded, a mixture of relief and disappointment washing over her. You can take Thomas's bedroll. I'll make up a place for you by the fire. Later, with Sam settled on the floor of her small sitting room and Martha in her bedroom, A strange tension hung in the cabin. Through the partially open door, Martha could hear Sam's steady breathing, could almost feel his presence just yards away. It had been so long since she'd shared her living space with anyone. Even with the door between them, there was an intimacy to the arrangement that made her heart race. What would people say if they knew Sam had spent the night under her roof? Would they assume the worst? Did she even care if they did? Martha turned restlessly in her bed, listening to the storm and thinking of the man sleeping in the next room, a man who had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated, a man who made her feel something other than grief for the first time in months. Was she ready for these feelings? Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory to even consider them? As rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the sky, Martha finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams a confused tangle of past and present, of Thomas's face fading into Sam's, of guilt and longing intertwined. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world sparkling in the early sunlight. Martha rose at dawn, as was her habit, and found Sam already awake, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, looking up as she entered the sitting room. "Thought I'd get things started before heading back." "You didn't wake me," Martha assured him, suddenly conscious of her loose hair and nightdress covered hastily with a shawl. "I'll just get dressed." When she returned, properly attired in a simple day dress, Sam had breakfast, waiting eggs and bacon he'd cooked himself. "Least I could do after imposing on your hospitality," he explained. They ate in companionable silence, both seemingly content to leave unspoken the tension of the previous evening. After breakfast, Sam gathered his things, thanked Martha for her kindness, and promised to return the following Sunday as usual. Martha watched him ride away, a curious mixture of emotions swirling within her. Relief that they had navigated the unexpected night without awkwardness, disappointment that nothing more had happened, anticipation of seeing him again, and beneath it all a persistent question. What exactly was developing between them? And was she ready for it? The answer came sooner than she expected. 3 days later, Martha was in town picking up supplies when she overheard two women talking in the general store. "Patterson's hired hand has been spending an awful lot of time at the Galloway place," one said to the other. "Every Sunday regular as clockwork. And Millie Jenkins says he stayed over during that big storm last week." "Shameful," the other replied, clucking her tongue. "Thomas barely cold in his grave. And she's already taking up with another man." Martha felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. She stepped around the corner, confronting the gossips directly. "If you have questions about my conduct, Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Donovan, I'd prefer you ask me directly rather than speculating behind my back." The women had the grace to look ashamed, though Mrs. Wilson quickly recovered. "We're just concerned for your reputation there. A young widow living alone, entertaining a single man. People will talk. Mr. Easton has been helping me with repairs around my property," Martha said stiffly. "Nothing more. And yes, he stayed during the storm in the sitting room, while I was in my bedroom with the door closed. It was either that or risk his life riding back in a deluge." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Donovan said soothingly, though her eyes remained skeptical. "We only want what's best for you." "What's best for me is to be left in peace to manage my affairs as I see fit," Martha replied, gathering her purchases and heading for the door. "Good day, ladies." Outside, Martha leaned against the hitching post, trying to calm her racing heart. She had known, of course, that people might notice Sam's regular visits, but she hadn't expected to feel so defensive, so exposed. The truth was, their speculation hit close to home. Martha couldn't deny that her feelings for Sam had grown beyond simple friendship. The question was what to do about it and whether Sam felt the same way. The following Sunday dawned clear and hot, the kind of June day that hinted at the scorching summer to come. Martha rose early, as always, but today she took extra care with her appearance. She wore her best day dress, a blue cotton that Thomas had always said matched her eyes, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. When Sam arrived, he seemed different, too freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt she hadn't seen before, his usual confident manner tinged with something that almost looked like nervousness. "Brought you something," he said after the initial greetings, reaching into his saddlebag. Pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Saw it in the Mercantile and thought of you." Martha unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was a beautiful tortoiseshell comb for her hair, simple but elegant, with tiny silver flowers inlaid along the edge. "Sam, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the delicate design. "But you shouldn't have wanted to," he interrupted, a flush creeping up his neck. "Been meaning to thank you properly for all the Sunday meals, the company." Martha looked up at him, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Martha felt that now familiar flutter in her chest again. But Sam broke the contact first, clearing his throat and suggesting they get started on the day's project, replacing some rotted boards on the porch steps. As they worked side by side in the growing heat, Martha found herself unusually aware of Sam's presence, the strength in his hands as he held boards steady for her to nail, the clean scent of soap that clung to him, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. "Let's take a break," Martha suggested, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's too hot for this work right now." Sam agreed readily. "Could use a swim myself." "Is that swimming hole you mentioned still accessible? The one downstream?" Martha nodded. "About a quarter-mile down. There's a big pool where the river widens and slows. Thomas and I used to swim there on days like this." "Would you show me?" Sam asked, then quickly added, "unless the memory is too painful." Martha considered this. She had avoided the swimming hole since Thomas's death, not wanting to confront the happy memories it held. But today, the idea didn't fill her with dread. "I'll show you. It's too hot not to take advantage of cool water." They walked together down the path that followed the river, Martha leading the way. The swimming hole was just as she remembered, a wide, deep pool where the Cimarron slowed and curved, shaded by cottonwood trees on one bank and bordered by a small sandy beach on the other. "It's perfect," Sam said, surveying the spot. "Private, too." Martha nodded, suddenly realizing the impropriety of what they were doing. Unmarried men and women didn't swim together, at least not in polite society. But they were far from town, and the heat was unbearable. "I'll just wait a bit while you swim," she decided aloud. "There's a stand of willows over there where you can have privacy to change." Sam looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "And you can use those rocks as a screen," he suggested, pointing to a large boulder formation at the water's edge. They separated to change, Martha removing only her shoes and stockings and rolling up her skirt to her knees. When she emerged from behind the rocks, Sam was already in the water, submerged to his chest. His clothes lay neatly folded on a flat rock nearby. Martha waded into the cool water, sighing with relief as it lapped around her calves. "This feels heavenly," Sam smiled, pushing wet hair back from his forehead. Should have done this weeks ago. Been swimming here often. Not since Thomas died, Martha admitted, moving deeper until the water reached her knees. We used to come at least once a week during summer. Good memories then. Yes, though it feels different now. She looked around at the familiar spot, realizing that she could be here without being overwhelmed by grief. Better than I expected. Sam swam a few strokes, moving into deeper water. Life has a way of moving forward, whether we're ready or not. Sometimes all we can do is try to keep up. Martha watched him, admiring the ease with which he moved through the water. You're a good swimmer. Grew up near a river in East Texas. Spent half my childhood in the water. He floated on his back, face turned to the sun. Nothing better on a hot day like this. Martha waded deeper until the water reached the hem of her rolled skirt. The coolness was irresistible in the summer heat. I wish I could swim properly, she said wistfully. Thomas was teaching me, but I never quite got the hang of it. Sam righted himself, standing where the water reached his shoulders. I could teach you if you'd like. Martha hesitated, aware again of the impropriety, but the temptation was strong. Perhaps another time, when I'm better prepared. Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. Offer stands whenever you're ready. They stayed by the swimming hole for over an hour, Sam swimming while Martha waded, and they talked of inconsequential things, the weather, the town gossip, Sam's experiences on cattle drives. When they finally headed back to the cabin, refreshed and cooled, Martha felt a lightness that had been absent for too long. The rest of the day passed pleasantly, with the porch steps completed by sunset. As always, Martha prepared a hearty supper, which they ate on the newly repaired porch to catch the evening breeze. I heard something interesting in town yesterday, Sam said as they lingered over coffee and the berry cobbler Martha had baked. Patterson's thinking of selling his place, says he's getting too old for ranching and wants to move back east to be near his daughter. Martha looked up in surprise. Selling? But he's been here longer than anyone. His was the first ranch in the valley. Times change, Sam shrugged. People change too. Says he's had enough of Colorado winters. What will you do when he sells? Martha asked, suddenly realizing the implications. Will you stay with the new owners? Sam was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. Actually, I've been thinking it might be time to settle somewhere permanent. Been drifting long enough. Martha's heart skipped a beat. Here? In this valley? Been thinking about it. Sam's gaze shifted to her face. Depends on a few things. What things? Martha asked, hardly daring to breathe. Sam set his coffee cup down carefully. Martha, I've grown very fond of you these past months. More than fond, if I'm being honest. Martha felt a flush creep up her neck. I've grown fond of you too, Sam. The thing is, he continued, his voice low and serious, I respect Thomas's memory and your grief. I wouldn't want to rush you or presume anything, but I find myself looking forward to Sundays more than anything else, and I hope you might feel something similar. Martha's throat felt tight with emotion. I do, she whispered, but it's complicated. It's only been a few months since Thomas died, and there's talk in town already. Sam nodded slowly. I heard some of it. People will always talk, Martha. Question is, do we let them decide our lives for us? No, Martha said firmly, but I need to be sure of my own heart. Thomas and I were happy. I loved him deeply. Sometimes I feel disloyal feeling this way about you. I understand that, Sam said gently. And I'd never ask you to forget him or what you shared. All I'm asking is for a chance to see where this might lead, at whatever pace feels right to you." Martha looked at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and become so important to her. "I'd like that," she said finally, "to see where it leads." Sam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That's all I needed to hear. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together on the porch, talking quietly, their hands occasionally brushing a tentative exploration of this new understanding between them. When Sam finally rose to leave, he took Martha's hand in his touch warm and sure. "May I call on you properly?" he asked. "Not just Sundays for work, but an actual social call. Perhaps take you to dinner in town next Saturday?" Martha nodded, her heart full. "I'd like that very much." Sam lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until then," he said softly, and released her hand. Martha watched him ride away, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. For the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself looking forward to something beyond simple survival. It was a strange feeling, part excitement, part guilt, part wonder, but undeniably, it felt like hope. The week passed in a blur of anticipation for Martha. She alternated between excitement about her upcoming dinner with Sam and waves of guilt that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. Was it too soon? What would Thomas think? Was she betraying his memory by moving forward? Yet each time these doubts arose, Martha remembered Thomas's own words to her when his mother had died the year before. "Life is for the living, Marty. We honor the dead by living well, not by stopping our own lives." Saturday evening arrived with Martha in a flutter of nerves. She wore her best dress, a deep green silk she'd saved for special occasions, and pinned her hair up with the tortoiseshell comb Sam had given her. As she fastened her mother's pearl earrings, Martha caught her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser and barely recognized herself. The haunted look that had lingered in her eyes for months had softened, replaced by a glow that spoke of renewed hope. Sam arrived promptly at 6, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He had trimmed his hair and beard, and the effect was striking. Martha felt a flutter in her stomach as she opened the door to him. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes warm with admiration. "Thank you," Martha replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather well yourself." Sam offered his arm, leading her to where he'd hitched the buggy he'd borrowed from Patterson for the evening. "Thought you deserved better than riding double on my horse," he explained with a smile. The ride into town was pleasant, the summer evening golden with late sunlight. Sam had made reservations at the hotel dining room, the finest establishment in the small town of Cedar Ridge. As they entered, Martha was acutely aware of the curious glances from other diners. The widow Galloway. Out in public with a man not her husband, it was bound to cause talk. But Sam's steady presence beside her gave Martha courage. They were seated at a corner table with a view of the town square, and Sam ordered a bottle of wine to accompany their meal. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass to hers. Martha hesitated only briefly before touching her glass to his. "New beginnings," she echoed. Throughout dinner, Martha was surprised by how easy conversation flowed between them. They discussed books they had read, places they had visited, dreams they still harbored. Sam spoke of his desire to have his own ranch someday, a modest operation where he could raise good horses and enough cattle to live comfortably. "Always wanted a place to call my own," he admitted. "After years of working other men's land, The idea of something that belongs to me, something I could pass on to children someday. It matters more than I expected." Martha nodded, understanding completely. "That's what Thomas and I wanted too. A legacy, something meaningful we built together." "You've done that," Sam said gently. "Your ranch is a testament to both of you, to what you created together." "It is," Martha agreed, "though sometimes I wonder if I can maintain it alone." A shadow crossed Sam's face. "Have you considered selling?" "Sometimes," Martha admitted, "when the work seems overwhelming or when I wake up in an empty house and the silence is too much." She sighed. "But then I think of all Thomas and I put into the place, how it was our dream, and I can't bear the thought of letting it go." Sam reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You're stronger than you know, Martha, whatever you decide. I admire your courage." The warmth of his hand on hers sent a shiver up Martha's arm. This simple touch, the first real intimacy they had shared, felt momentous. She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything these past months, for helping with the ranch, but more importantly, for helping me remember how to live again." Sam's eyes held hers, deep with emotion. "You've done the same for me. I was just drifting before, going through the motions. Now I have something to look forward to, something that matters." They might have continued in this vein, but they are interrupted by the arrival of dessert apple pie with fresh cream. The moment of intensity passed, but the connection remained, a current running between them as they finished their meal. After dinner, Sam suggested a walk around the town square, where a small band was playing for the Saturday evening promenade. As they strolled arm in arm under the lantern-lit trees, Martha was conscious of more curious glances, some disapproving, others merely interested. "People are watching us," she murmured to Sam. "Let them," he replied, his voice unconcerned. "We're not doing anything wrong, Martha." "I know that, but Mrs. Galloway, what a surprise to see you out and about." Martha turned to find Mrs. Wilson approaching, her husband in tow. The older woman's eyes darted between Martha and Sam, thinly veiled disapproval evident in her pinched expression. "Good evening, Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson," Martha said politely. "You remember Mr. Easton from the Patterson Ranch?" "Of course," Mrs. Wilson replied, barely acknowledging Sam with a nod. "My dear, I've been meaning to call on you. We're all so concerned about you. All alone out there since poor Thomas passed." The condescension in her tone made Martha bristle, but she maintained her composure. "That's very kind, but as you can see, I'm managing quite well." "Yes, well." Mrs. Wilson's gaze flicked to Sam again. "It's good you have friends to help you, though some might think it a bit soon to be seen socially in town." Before Martha could respond, Sam stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Wilson, I have the greatest respect for Mrs. Galloway and for the memory of her husband. Our friendship is entirely proper, and I don't believe anyone has the right to suggest otherwise." Mr. Wilson, who had remained silent until now, placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "Agatha, we should let these young people enjoy their evening. Good night, Mrs. Galloway, Mr. Easton." As the Wilsons moved away, Martha released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you for defending me," she said to Sam, "though I fear it will only add fuel to the gossip." Sam shook his head. "People like Mrs. Wilson will gossip regardless. The only way to silence them is to live your life with such integrity that their words eventually ring hollow." Martha smiled up at him, grateful for his understanding. "You're a wise man, Samuel Easton." "Not wise," he corrected with a grin. "Just old enough to have stopped caring what people like the Wilsons think." They continued their walk, the encounter with the Wilsons fading as they enjoyed the music and the pleasant evening air. When the band began playing a waltz, Sam turned to Martha with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance?" he asked. "Or is that pushing propriety too far?" Martha hesitated only briefly. "I think propriety is already thoroughly pushed," she said with a small laugh. "We might as well dance." Sam led her to the small area where other couples were dancing, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her other hand in his. Martha hadn't danced since Thomas's death, and for a moment she felt awkward, unsure. But Sam led confidently, and soon they were moving together in perfect rhythm. "You dance well," Martha observed, surprised. "Had a grandmother who insisted I learn," Sam replied. "Said no grandson of hers would shuffle around a dance floor like a bear with sore feet." Martha laughed, the sound carrying across the square. It felt good to laugh openly again, to enjoy herself without that immediate stab of guilt that had accompanied any moment of happiness in the months after Thomas's death. As they danced, Martha became aware of Sam's physical presence in a way she hadn't before: the solid strength of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of him, the way his eyes never left her face. A warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer evening. When the dance ended, Sam didn't immediately release her. They stood for a moment, close enough that Martha could feel the rise and fall of his chest, see the pulse beating in his throat. "Martha," he said, his voice low. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the town clock striking 10. Sam glanced up, then back at Martha with regret in his eyes. "I should get you home. It's getting late." The drive back to Martha's ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The night had grown cooler, and Sam wrapped a blanket around Martha's shoulders, his hands lingering briefly before he returned them to the reins. When they arrived at her cabin, Sam helped Martha down from the buggy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. They stood for a moment in the silver wash of moonlight, neither quite ready for the evening to end. "Thank you for tonight," Martha said softly. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "The pleasure was mine," Sam replied, his voice equally quiet. "I've been wanting to take you to dinner since the first Sunday I spent here." Martha looked up at him, surprised. "That long ago?" "That long ago," he confirmed. "From the moment I saw you by the river, something told me you were important. I just didn't know how important you would become." Martha's heart beat faster at his words. "Sam." He took a step closer, his eyes asking a question. When Martha didn't move away, he raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. "May I kiss you good night, Martha?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with significance. This wasn't merely about a kiss, it was about moving forward, about accepting that life continued even after devastating loss. Martha nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Sam leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. But Martha didn't want to change her mind. She raised her face to his, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle, questioning, and full of promise. It lasted only moments, but when Sam pulled back, Martha felt forever changed. This wasn't betrayal of Thomas, she realized. This was life asserting itself, reminding her that the heart's capacity for love wasn't limited or diminished by loss, but perhaps even expanded by it. "Good night, Martha," Sam said, his voice husky. "Good night, Sam," she replied, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. As she watched him drive away, Martha knew with certainty that her life had turned a corner. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, she looked toward the future with anticipation rather than dread. The weeks that followed were a time of transformation for Martha. Sam began calling on her regularly, not just on Sundays, but often in the evenings after his work at Patterson's was done. They would sit on her porch watching the sunset, talk for hours by the fire, or sometimes ride together to check her fence lines or move cattle to fresh pasture. Each visit deepened their connection, and Martha found herself opening up to Sam in ways she hadn't with anyone since Thomas. She told him of her fears about managing the ranch alone, her grief over the children she and Thomas had hoped for but never conceived, her doubts about her own strength. In turn, Sam shared his own struggles, the nightmares that still sometimes plagued him from the war, his regrets over the rootless years he'd spent drifting from job to job, his deep desire to build something lasting. "I wasted too many years," he confessed one evening as they sat by the fire. "After Rebecca, after the war, I just couldn't see the point in putting down roots, figured I'd probably die young anyway, like so many of my friends did." "What changed?" Martha asked, her hand finding his in the firelight. Sam's fingers tightened around hers. "I got older," he said with a wry smile. "Realized I didn't want to die alone in some bunkhouse on a ranch whose owner barely knew my name. Wanted something that was mine, someone who would miss me when I was gone." The vulnerability in his voice touched Martha deeply. This strong, capable man had his own fears, his own wounds. Somehow, knowing this made her feel less alone in her own struggles. As July turned to August, their relationship continued to deepen. The town gossip gradually subsided as people grew accustomed to seeing them together. Even Mrs. Wilson eventually offered a grudging acceptance when Sam helped her husband repair their wagon after an accident on the road to town. One particularly hot afternoon, Sam suggested another visit to the swimming hole. This time Martha came prepared, wearing an old dress she didn't mind getting wet. "I'll teach you to swim properly," Sam promised as they walked along the river path. "It's a skill everyone should have, especially living so close to water." At the swimming hole, they separated to change as before. When Martha emerged from behind the rocks, she found Sam already in the water, waiting for her. Taking a deep breath, she waded in until the water reached her waist, her old dress billowing around her. "Ready?" Sam asked, swimming closer. Martha nodded, though her heart was racing with nervous anticipation. "I trust you," she said simply. Sam's expression softened at her words. "We'll start easy, just floating on your back. I'll support you until you get the feel of it." For the next hour, Sam patiently taught Martha the basics of swimming, how to float, how to move her arms and legs in coordination, how to hold her breath underwater. His hands were always there to support her, strong and reassuring. By the time they finished, Martha could swim a short distance on her own, though she still preferred having Sam nearby. As they rested on the sandy bank, letting the sun dry their wet clothes, Martha felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Thank you," she said, turning to look at Sam beside her. "Not just for teaching me to swim, but for everything, for helping me remember that I'm still alive, that there's still joy to be found." Sam propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Martha," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." She nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. Have been for weeks now, maybe from that first day by the river. I know it might be too soon for you to feel the same, and that's all right. I can wait. But I wanted you to know." Martha reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "I love you too, Sam. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid it somehow diminished what I had with Thomas, but it doesn't. It's different, but just as real." Sam turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Martha replied and pulled him down to her. Their kiss this time was different from that first tentative one, deeper, more certain, filled with the promise of a shared future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Martha felt as though she had crossed some invisible threshold. There was no going back now, only forward into whatever life held for them together. As August drew to a close, Patterson announced that he had found a buyer for his ranch, a wealthy banker from Denver who wanted a country property but would keep the current foreman to run daily operations. Sam would be welcome to stay on, Patterson assured him, with a slight increase in pay as an incentive. "What will you do?" Martha asked when Sam told her the news that evening. They were sitting on her porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that," he said finally. "Been saving my wages for years, never having much to spend them on, have a fair amount put aside." Martha waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "Martha," Sam continued, turning to face her directly, "I love you. I want a life with you, but I don't want to be just a hired hand on your ranch or Patterson's. I want us to be partners in everything." "What are you saying?" Martha asked, though she thought she knew. Sam took her hands in his. "I'm saying I want to marry you, if you'll have me. Combine my savings with what you have here. Build something together that's ours, not just yours or mine." Martha's heart swelled with emotion. "Are you proposing, Samuel Easton?" "I am," he confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. "Not very eloquently, perhaps, but with all my heart. Martha Galloway, will you marry me?" Martha didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Sam pulled her into his arms, his kiss fierce and joyful. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "It's not fancy," he said, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band. "Belonged to my grandmother. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for when I found the right woman." Martha held out her left hand, where Thomas's ring still resided. Slowly she removed it, feeling a pang of sadness, but no regret. She would always love Thomas, would always honor his memory, but her future lay with Sam now. "It's perfect," she said as Sam slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger. "Just like us." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Cedar Ridge. Martha wore a new dress of pale blue silk with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Sam looked handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit, his hair freshly trimmed for the occasion. The church was surprisingly full. Despite the initial gossip, many in the community had come to respect the quiet devotion growing between the young widow and the hard-working cowboy. Even Mrs. Wilson attended, though she sniffed loudly during the vows. Afterward, they hosted a small reception at Martha's now their ranch. Tables were set up under the cottonwood trees, laden with food contributed by neighbors. There was music and dancing, laughter, and a few tears. As the celebration continued into the evening, Sam found Martha standing alone by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Very." she replied, leaning into him, though I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been a dream. If it is, we're sharing the same one, Sam said, pressing a kiss to her temple. And I don't want to wake up. As darkness fell and their guests began to depart, Martha felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, with this man, on this land. The path that had led her here was marked with both joy and sorrow, but she wouldn't change it. Every step had brought her to this moment. Later that night, as she lay in Sam's arms in what was now their bedroom, Martha thought of that day by the river when she had felt so alone, so lost. How different everything was now. She had found love again when she least expected it, with a man who understood both her strength and her vulnerability. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, his voice drowsy in the darkness. Martha smiled, pressing closer to his warmth. "I was thinking about the day we met, how I was sitting by the river, believing I was completely alone in the world. And then I stepped out of the shadows and said, 'Not anymore,'" Sam finished for her. "Not anymore," Martha repeated softly. "And I never will be again, will I?" Sam's arms tightened around her. "Not as long as I'm breathing," he promised. "Not ever again." 5 years later, Martha stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Sam led their 3-year-old daughter Sarah on her first pony ride around the corral. The little girl's delighted squeals carried on the summer breeze, bringing a smile to Martha's face. So much had changed since that fateful day by the river. With Sam's savings and Martha's land, they had built a thriving ranch operation. They'd expanded the herd, bought additional acreage when neighboring properties came up for sale, and even started breeding horses, Sam's particular passion. The house had grown too, with additional rooms added as their family expanded. Sarah had arrived after 2 years of marriage, a tiny miracle with her father's green-gray eyes and her mother's auburn hair. Now Martha cradled their second child, 2-month-old William, against her shoulder as she watched her husband and daughter. "Look, Mama," Sarah called, waving one small hand while the other clutched the saddle horn. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, sweetheart," Martha called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Sam beamed with pride, one hand steady on the pony's lead rope, the other hovering near Sarah's back. He looked up, catching Martha's eye across the yard, and his smile deepened, full of love and shared contentment. Martha thought back to the woman she had been 5 years ago, broken, lost, convinced that happiness was behind her. How wrong she had been! Life had more chapters than she could have imagined, more joy waiting to be discovered. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Martha felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. For Thomas, who had given her the courage to come west and build a life. For Sam, who had taught her that the heart could heal and love again. For their children, who represented hope and the future. And for that day by the river, when a widow sat thinking she was alone, until a cowboy stepped from the shadows and said, "Not anymore."